to start with topics that can come across as potentially controversial. Um, Not that they are per se, but that the ideas carry a lot of weight with them.
Welcome to Untitled Planning. My name is Sami. Alongside me is Alex. We are the founders of this platform. Today, we're joined by Rachel from Studio Leonardo. Rachel is a passionate architect and content creator who delves into the intricate relationships between architecture and community and well-being. Through insightful videos, Rachel explores how design influences our daily lives, striving to create spaces and foster connections and belonging.
So welcome, Rachel, to Untitled Planning. So for those who are new here, Untitled Planning is a platform aiming to simplify and ignite conversations surrounding urban planning and geography, fostering clarity and action and understanding the forces shaping our cities. In addition to our media content, we also provide research and consulting services. So please check out our website to explore the services that we offer.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with me.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. So first things first. Can you maybe introduce yourself a bit more and tell us about your background and what led you into creating content on YouTube?
Sure, yeah. So I guess where do we start? We can go way back, at around fourth grade or so. I think, however old you are, I've just always had an interest in building and our built environment. When I was a kid, I was very interested in Legos, was not really able to focus on anything, typical child. But the only thing I'd be able to sit down and sit still for was to sit there and build and create. And so that's where the love of the idea of taking something out of your mind and making it real and like physical really started. And it never stopped. I went to university and I ended up studying for a 5-year bachelor's degree in architecture. And in that time, got the opportunity to live abroad in Germany, where I spent a year and really got in touch with how urbanism, more so than just architecture, really impacts the way that we live our lives, and wanted to ultimately explore that in my thesis my senior year, or my second senior year of university. So when I came back to the United States, I dedicated my thesis year to redeveloping a part of the university's campus that was pretty underdeveloped area, and wanting to make it more of a more secure and enhanced urban landscape for the students to actually enjoy. And that's really where it all started to spiral. The love for how infrastructure really incentivizes community. And since then, I've found myself back in Europe, continuing to learn from the landscapes that surround me, the infrastructure that surrounds me that's been here for a really long time, as well as the new developments that are happening in the country that I currently live in, which is Spain. I don't know how deep you want me to go on that stuff. But, one thing led to another, and I've always had a passion for YouTube as well. I studied um, I studied marketing and project management while I was out here as well in a master's, and figured that talking about urban planning and architecture and how it impacts us was another aspect I felt that is not really touched on very well in our space, and wanted to contribute my voice um, to that online, and was really happy to see that there are other people who are doing it like you guys, and wanted to connect. And that's kind of where I'm at right now in my journey.
Well, awesome. And so you touched a little bit on what kind of inspired you to create this content, but I want to dive deeper for those who are for those who are like new to. So how would you describe the mission or overarching goal of your YouTube channel to someone who's new to your content?
Sure. Yeah. I have a very deep love for humanity in general and our well-being as just people in general. And I think what I want to touch on actually as I move forward with my content is how people in place are really well connected to each other, and the importance that we sorry, let me take a step back.
Mm.
Um, I think it's just important for us to realize that that space impacts how we live, how we feel, and if it's not designed to be convenient for our lifestyles, then it can be a burden to how we live our lives. And what I like to try and discuss on my channel is why culture or certain aspects of like emotional states of being, for example, loneliness is a topic we've touched on quite a bit on the channel, are impacted by physical space. And not necessarily that it's singularly impacted by physical space, but how we can look at physical space as a one culprit or one factor that could be improved, and trying to find positive ways to discuss that and then incite action to improve it.
Yeah, that's great. So maybe you can give a brief overview of the types of topics and themes your audience can expect to find on your current channel, and what you hope the viewers can take away from watching your videos about architecture and the community, and everything else that you just talked about.
For sure. Yeah, like I said, I some of my pillars are to create positive content, content that's initiate incentivizing change, and understanding that that takes patience, but that we need to e- be respectful of each other and of each other's opinions. I really love when people comment on the channel, because I find that that's a nice way for you to have thoughtful conversation. If we set the groundwork to have that thoughtful conversation. That being said, I would say that the types of content that I make definitely revolve predominantly around how we can discuss urban planning and the suburbs,
Mm.
talking about how loneliness is a a major, or yeah, how loneliness has been a major just topic in the world, and what how that relates to architecture. And in the future, I'll be looking at specific places, both in North America and in the EU, that are championing their spaces and actually using culture and their built environment to bring community together and increase the like social bonds and social cohesion that I would hope that we're all able to achieve at some point around the world someday.
Someday. Hopefully
Yeah,
someday soon.
right. I know, I know. Well,
Yeah.
that's the point, right? It's like, you know, if I love humanity, like I think there's so much good that we have to offer, and I know I have a very positive and optimistic perspective on that. But I think that sometimes we get really caught up in the negative, and especially in like planning and in architecture, like we can be very critical because it's in the nature of the job description to be hypersensitive and critical to how we're designing our spaces, right?
Mhm.
But normally when we're having those conversations, it can sometimes just stop there versus actually trying to go the extra step of like, what can we actually do then, given these little things, which I like to call these issues, which I call
Mhm.
opportunities. How can we actually address them? And
Mm.
considering we're online, there's so many voices that can be heard. I think we have so much more knowledge from different perspectives, from different people, and it's so much more accessible now more than ever. And we should leverage that to actually increase the or enhance, excuse me, the built spaces that we're in.
For sure. Just a quick follow-up on that. I think you have about like now 90 videos between short form and long form.
Mhm.
Um, Out of those, what has been your favorite to create, or maybe the ones that you learned from the most, and what were those topics specifically?
That's a great question. My favorite video to date, I think, is probably the video that I did on Pamplona, which is the city that I currently live in, on San Fermines, which is a 7 to 9 day festival that takes place here in July, beginning of July, and it is a nonstop party. And when I first heard that, I thought, okay, party is very synonymous, I think, in North American culture, and maybe more specifically in the United States, with maybe some of the college movies that you see with the flashy lights and different ways of drinking adult beverages, right? But from experiencing the way that communities come together here, it's much more than that. And I really think that we can attribute that to the fact that the infrastructure that's in place, as well as things like maintenance crews, and other government bodies that are working day and night to make sure that this thing goes smoothly. Um, that all I wanted to highlight those aspects of what a party is, and hopefully shift the viewpoint of people into, okay, these are cultural elements and that may make sense to us in a certain way given our context and where we grew up, but in another place they mean something different. And it's beautiful, like the fact that all of these people are able, young and old, are together in one place. They're sitting in the streets, with makeshift tables and chairs, and eating and just hanging out, and then someone's bringing a guitar and playing music, and like that is the 9-day festival. That is the 9-day party. It's the celebration of life, the celebration of the cities that they grew up in. um, I'm sorry, I ramble a lot, but you can cut in whatever, wherever you want. So that would probably be one of my favorite videos that I made that was more interactive. I was in the city a bit more. I'd like to make more of content like that moving forward. And then some of the more recent stuff that I'm proud of in terms of the storytelling and the production value, are my last two videos where I have taken a bit more collaboration with, other creators, and dived into topics that have to do with building better social spaces for people, third places as well, I guess is how most people know, of them. And then the idea that our infrastructure is very new. It's a baby, speaking in the context of North America, compared to a lot of these European cities that, often North America gets compared to. Um, and that there's a lot of room for change if we're willing to take the steps today to get there. So, I'm sorry, I don't know if I've fully answered your question. I definitely went on a rabbit hole with the Pamplona video.
That's great. If that's your favorite video, then you answer the question that you've created. Um, yeah.
Well, I'd say, a lot of your work is about, capturing that creativity that you find in different cities, and that's what makes it so like dynamic and engaging. But we're curious to know more about like your approach, yeah, like to your own creative process of developing content for your channel.
Okay, so like how I'm coming up with ideas and creating the videos themselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think a lot of my inspiration, is it just feels very inherent to who I am, which is like not the answer that maybe you want to hear, but
Just you.
even yeah,
Yeah.
right. I mean, it's just kind of like I feel it. I just get excited about these topics, and you can talk to my friends from, before even studying in university and in high school, and like any fact that I got to figure out about buildings, I was like, talking to my friends and like, come to this building corner, let me tell you about this brick. I just love it. I find that, like many people may love words or art, I find that being inside of the art that we're creating on the scale that we create it for humans to inhabit is, one of the most fascinating and incredible things in life. And the fact that we can walk through spaces that have so much historical, presence and, importance is wild. I grew up outside of Washington D.C., and so walking on the mall and knowing just how much history has happened there, um, and the fact that that is ingrained in the space, just because of its existence, is something that I don't know, I can't explain. And so a lot of that just naturally kind of comes out of my in my writing, which is something I'm constantly also improving on. I guess more on the technical aspect on that. It's definitely something that, it takes time. I'm still working on, but the people who are resonating with it, I really appreciate. And ultimately, that's kind of what I do it for, is that conversation and to hear what other people have to say.
Yeah, for sure. And just like going back to a part of that question was just what's that process? Like
Mhm.
there's all of that inspiration and the reason behind it, and just I'm curious, like how do you actually uh, execute like
Mm,
maybe
mhm,
a video from like start to finish,
for
especially in
sure.
the urbanism world, because I feel like every creator kind of does it a bit differently, and we all
Mm,
have our own approach. And so I'm curious what your approach, and for the
yeah,
audience,
yeah.
how does that look like?
Sure. Well, like I said, I want to take more of a positive approach, and again, that's just something that like is inherent to me in the way that I would prefer to frame my content. So, I like to start with topics that can come across as potentially controversial. Um, Not that they are per se, but that the ideas carry a lot of weight with them. Topics like loneliness or how American urban planning is quote unquote terrible. Um, North American urban planning, I should specify. These are things that, either people have said to me, I think also potentially come from places of more negativity, people who feel maybe hurt even by people who make comments and criticisms about urban planning online, even though they may have some truth. There's definitely like a sense of if you are talking poorly about my space, then I'm not necessarily happy with you, or like I feel like I should lash back out at you. So my process typically starts there is like, okay, what are these topics that people may feel as a pain point, and how can we address it and make it feel more embracing of all different kinds of ideas? Because everybody's thoughts and perspectives, in my opinion, are valid and have importance, and we need them in order to actually make spaces that feel more contextual to where you live. So I start there, and from that point, I try to come up with different um, different examples of places that are doing things well, places that maybe need improvement. I like to find a lot of historical context as well because I think that that establishes a really good base of like this is a precedent that we could see and use. That does not necessarily mean that the results of the way that this next place is going to develop will be like exactly the same. But if we see enough different historical precedents that have similar trends, then we should have hope. And that's kind of the ultimate message. Is like have hope. It's okay to just begin discussing this. It's okay to be wrong sometimes. That this is a huge field to begin to discuss and take part in. And everyone has different ideas, and some of those ideas work really well for some places, and in others they don't. But that's why I think the communication aspect of what we do is the most important part to set the foundation for successful projects. Hopefully that answers the question a little bit better.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, that's great because I think there's a lot of urbanists or planners or geographers and theorists that are trying to enter the space, especially with the rise of social media.
Mm,
And I think it's good uh, to be clear in the process. And I think that's something that
mm,
a lot of these urbanist channels should start doing a bit more and talking about
mhm.
how this comes to be because it can be very overwhelming, especially with like there's so many topics, so many ideas, so many different approaches between like seven different like you got long form, medium form, short form. You got
Yeah.
and within
No,
each one,
totally.
there's different ways of doing it. So
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Actually, if I could just jump on that real quick too. Um, I think if you're starting out specifically on trying to make content online and reach out to an audience, one, if you come to my channel or Sammy and Alex's channel, like leave a comment because we're really open to talking to other people who have the same interests as us. There's not a lot of us right now, and so the more we get to know of others, I at least speaking for myself am always super excited to have that conversation. And if you're going into video making and maybe you're not interested in reaching out, then you definitely should focus probably on what your pillars are. Like, why are you making this content to begin with? If you can find that, that's going to be your driver because it is definitely a journey going from one thing to the other. There's a lot of experimentation, which can be fun but overwhelming at times. And I think if you're willing to stick to your why and know that you have something that you're trying to achieve, that the process will be a lot more enjoyable, and ultimately, that's what all of this is. It's a process, not only online, but also in trying to make our built environment better.
Yeah, for sure. And the one of our main pillars with Alex and I at Untitled Planning is progression over perfection. Just
Mm,
focus on progressing, focus on doing something a bit better, and enjoy the progression aspect of it. Like each time you progress a bit, you learn a new edit, or you learn a new
yeah,
topic, or you learn how to write a better script. That should feel like a victory, and that shouldn't feel like, oh man, it's still not as good as
totally.
YouTuber A or YouTuber B, because
Mm,
those people also went through that process to be that good, right? And sometimes
totally.
that's someone's like whole career, right? Like if someone's in media, like there's some fellow creators within the urbanist field, they're not planners, they're not architects, they're not and any of that. They're actual journalists to start with. So that's
Mhm.
already their skill set. And so you can't compare someone with 7 years of experience or 10 years of experience or 10 years of schooling with 3 days. Like it's day three. Day
Yeah,
three, why can't I
completely.
write that good?
For sure. Well, and I think, even to that point, like us as urbanists and architecture, architects or planners, we're all still fairly young in our career, and if there's a learning aspect as well as we continue to grow, and I honestly hope until I'm older, um, in my career and far beyond, because the fact that you are learning is what makes this so interesting. Every project that you're going to take on is going to be different and new. And YouTube is a different beast completely in terms of the stuff that you need to learn. But if you're already in urbanism and you like the aspect of urbanism, I say is the generalization of like architecture, planning, space design. Um, if you already are in that, and I'm assuming you enjoy the tough slog that it is of sometimes just like the tedious learning and reiterating and reiterating and reiterating. Like YouTube and social media in general is very similar. Different results and outcomes, but yeah, I would say that's definitely the case.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just to add an extra comment on there before we go on to the next question, uh, like Alex and I spent 7 years in school for planning and
Mm,
geography. We did not
mhm.
spend 7 years in school to learn how to write on media posts or like media content or marketing or any of that. So
I hear you.
I'm thinking about if I was a first year student creating media posts for or like whatever topic, it's not going to be great. But on year seven, I'm sure it's going to be significantly better because if I compared my writing in first year university, oof, no one would probably thought I would be like graduated my master's degree. They would be like, that guy's done after year one, he's done for.
Who is this
So
man?
who was like, how did this even happen? But like I
Right.
just kept on progressing and like thinking
Yeah.
about like, yeah.
Yeah,
Anyways,
it's just taking it as it is and as it comes and being okay with the failures, but also like patting yourself on the back when you feel like you've made progress and know that that's going to be continuous. That's really
exactly.
what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think like a similar but follow up question would be, what are some creators or channels on YouTube that you draw inspiration from and why?
Mm. That's a great question too. Um, I think a lot of people have already mentioned in the comments of my videos, I love Johnny Harris's work. If you've not seen that, he's a video journalist who focuses on geopolitics. He makes wonderful content, beautiful storytelling, and he keeps it very factual and relevant to culturally what's happening, as well as politically what's happening in our world today. Um, yeah, that's pretty short and sweet. And then other people that I really draw inspiration from are people like Nathaniel Drew. I think he brings more of an artistic perspective or view to the world, and there's definitely still part of me coming from the design background. I really do enjoy like a nicely framed shot. um I'm working on getting coloring and stuff right, but there are things that I enjoy, and I'm conscious of trying to better in every video. So I would say his content, and then Yes Theory as well is another big inspiration for me. In the future, and we'll see about this, but in the future, my hope is to interact more with the people that are in these cities and towns that I'm talking about and actually get their perspective on. Maybe I should repeat myself. That happens sometimes. I'd say in the future, I'm hoping to to reach out to these different communities and towns and actually speak with them and speak with the people that live there, get more context on why they love where they live, if they do love where they live, because ultimately that's the message that I want to spread is why do people love where they live, but more importantly, how can we make that possible in other places? So as I continue through my journey, as we continue through our journeys, I hope that I also develop my own style and my own sense of voice. But their content definitely is a very big inspiration for me. And I think at the moment it does shine through in some of my work, but you guys can tell me, you can leave comments down below if you feel like that's true or not.
So building on that, like what advice would you give to other aspiring architects or urban enthusiasts who want to contribute positively to their communities through their work?
Hmm. Yeah. It's it almost takes a blind confidence to to be in a position where you feel like open and like you have to be okay with receiving a lot of rejection and a lot of people maybe not people being critical of the ideas that you're coming to the floor with, but I don't think that that means there's not a place for it. On the contrary, I mean, if you look at this strictly through a business lens, they have the red ocean and blue ocean theory. Red ocean being that you have the market is pretty saturated and it's very difficult to have competition. Whereas blue ocean is more the idea that there's ample opportunity. And much like I think having a positive mindset leads to having ample opportunity when you're looking at architectural and urban issues, I also believe that it will help you stand out being a more positive architect, um, to clients, to other people who are interested in this field that you're speaking to on a daily basis. It's not to say that there aren't like moments where you may feel doubtful of yourself, but there is a community of us, and also reaching out and having connections with those people. Like I've said before, please feel free to reach out to me if you want to have those kinds of conversations. I'm here to hopefully help create that network between us and create stronger bonds for people who are looking to speak about this in a more positive light and also incite action.
Yeah, that was, I think, great advice. And maybe to give some context on how we connected.
Yeah,
So
please.
the Untitled Planning times
The
Studio
the
Leonardo,
what's
the
that art
touch.
piece called? Yeah.
I don't know, but I know the one.
Leave it in the comments, guys, leave it in the
Yeah, yeah.
comments. Let us know.
Um, so
We're not artists, we're on the other side
you
of
are
that.
you're an
Well,
artist, an architect, artist,
we're
same
working on
thing.
it. We're yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess the central theme that brought us together was the concept of third spaces and urban isolation. You reached out to us after watching one of our first podcasts on third spaces, and
Mhm.
coincidentally, one of the first videos, or the first video on your channel, also dives into loneliness and urban isolation and the perception of space a bit. And so, can you tell us a bit more about the origins of your interests in space and place and urban isolation?
Yeah, for sure. Well, one, as an aside, I think if people are listening to this podcast right now and they don't know who you guys are, they need to set. I'm getting too excited. They need to check out your channel because I am obsessed with the content that you make and the people that you speak to. I'm even learning a lot about different people that are in this industry, and what they offer to it, like cultural planning and whatnot. Like those are amazing tools that I also wish that I had while I was in school. Um, I'm sorry, I'm going to segue for a second here
No
because
worries.
when I was studying architecture, I definitely felt like most of my conversations were around very theoretical, like what does design mean? How do we stretch the boundaries of what it means to build a building? Which is great. I think that they're definitely needed conversations to some extent, but I believe that if I had had the access of like architects as a service, or architecture as a service, or what is the impact of food and culture on the way that we live in our spaces, like those are conversations I wish I had. So if you have not checked them out, my long story short is you need to subscribe to Untitled Planning and actually get your ears into what they're talking about because it's really good. And to readdress your question, can you just re up on that real quick? Because I needed to promo you because you need it. Like I'm
Oh,
obsessed with
thank you
this
so
topic.
much. Yeah, we really appreciate it, and we are still relatively new, so we get it. It's a grind, but
It is, but your grades, go check them out,
yes,
please.
Thank
thank you.
you.
But I think the question, no, but yeah. So what connected us, I think, was urban isolation and
Yeah.
loneliness. And
Mhm,
so, could you
mhm.
tell us a bit more about the origins of your interest in space and place and urban isolation and
Yeah.
loneliness as a whole?
For sure, for sure. Okay, so when I took my time abroad in Germany, I lived in a town called Braunschweig, which is called Brunswick in English, and it was connected all through trams. And I like lived, a foot away from my university buildings and was able to get into town very quickly. And now, granted, like these places were built to kind of be on foot, when they were built, but the access to the tram was great because I literally had connection to the whole country. And it was one of the first times that I had really experienced how infrastructure and transit specifically could really benefit my ability to do anything essentially. I could travel very easily. And just like through school as well, I had in the United States, I had professors who were very interested in sustainability, social sustainability specifically, and how our built environment is impacts our space. So I had that kind of in my ear at the beginning, but I'd never experienced it, only really having to compare like the suburban area I grew up in and the college campus that I then was living at. And so there were differences there that I noticed, but that freedom of like, whoa, there's actually this is real. Like the way that we design our spaces really does have an impact on what we do in our day-to-day lives, was huge. And then in my thesis year is when I started to think about more so like how loneliness is impacted by the way that we build our spaces, specifically like talking about the suburbs, looking at how when you're going to a store, the typical trajectory is you are in your car or you're in your house, you get into your car, which is typically in a driveway or garage. So you're barely leaving your front door. You get into that car, you pull up to your local store, strip mall, or grocery store. You step out, you're in the grocery store for maybe an hour. Maybe you can run into some people there, it's possible, and then you're back in your car, back in your driveway, back in your home, and your social interaction there is very limited, right? And as the idea of loneliness becomes more of a hot topic, which it shouldn't just be a hot topic, this is a very relevant issue today. As this becomes more spoken about, I should say, um, it was something that I just became much more interested in, especially considering how I felt impacted by having such a different contrast between living in um, the suburbs, a college town, and then abroad for a year.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess never mind, Alex. Do the honors of the next question.
No worries.
Finger guns. Yeah, right.
um, but okay, so just building off of that, like in what ways do you think that like architecture and urban planning can contribute to creating meaningful and inclusive spaces that foster this sense of belonging?
Mm. Yeah, like I said, one of my biggest mantras is that good infrastructure incentivizes strong community. And I specifically use the word incentivize because I believe that it can make things more convenient for us, in that in the example of the suburbs, for we can then look in contrast to even just living on a college campus. And if we only are looking at this in a bubble, because of course there are other factors that kind of play into the way that our built environment is shaped and how universities are even perceived by some. There's a lot to discuss here, but when the in at university, I was living in a space where I could leave my front door and walk 5 minutes down the road and actually be at my local grocery store at the time, which was a Kroger. And I would walk to campus every day. And there's so many aspects of the fact that I was able to get outside, I was able to move my body for a bit, and I even would run into people on my way to work. Like the serendipitous nature of the like relationships I was able to foster was like amazing. And that had to do with the fact that the spaces around me were conveniently placed and built for me to do so. Uh, yes, they also had local buses, and cars were also a main mode of transportation, but it the fact that there were places that were in close proximity to each other within at least a 20-minute walking distance. And I'm a walker. I like to walk, so I will say that maybe for some that seems like a long distance to be walking, but even still, I felt protected as well, and I think that comes from our fellow friends from the landscape department know that who focus on creating designs that help to shade our streets and make us feel protected from major roadways and things like that. Um, yeah, design plays a huge, huge part in incentivizing the convenience and safety and security of how we of our well-being in these spaces. Now, again, the incentivizing part, I just want to touch on that one more time, is what are we doing in those spaces to continue to provide life in there? This is something that I really want to start to drive home on in my content personally, because there should be other stuff that comes out of maybe policies or from local governments that help to create that help to use these spaces a bit more, creating social and communal gatherings that engage us and create memories and want us to be tied to these places, creating unique sense of place and so on and so forth.
Yeah, fascinating. In regards to third spaces, how can architects and urban planners intentionally design spaces to encourage the emerging emergence need of third spaces within neighborhoods or urban areas? And if you find that to be repetitive, then we can go to the next question.
How can you repeat it one more time?
For sure. How can architects and urban planners intentionally sorry, intentionally design spaces to encourage the emergence of third spaces or third places within neighborhoods or urban areas?
Mm. Well, I think it is definitely it's a different question, right? I think that's where we're all at, right?
Yeah.
Is what can we do to incentivize that? What I try to encourage people who are just trying to get into it, because some of what I would like to do is I'm trying to encourage mostly people who maybe don't have on my YouTube channel, people who don't have much of a background in this to begin to feel comfortable talking about this, even if it's just to friends and family. Um, I think in order to know how to create good third places, you need to know how to see a good third place and recognize what characteristics are being used in those third places that you could then potentially repeat in spaces around you, and make them contextual to where you live. And to begin to see that, I think one, you need to first look, what are people doing? What kinds of people are there? Are they young? Are they old? Is it mixed? Ideally, you want a good amount of people from all different age groups, different classes, different income classes. That can be a little hard to tell, but things like this. That should be the first cue. And second, I think you want to listen, hear people. What are they doing? Is there laughter? Does the conversation feel relaxed? Right. You can then look at from what you're hearing and the body language of the people around you. Do they feel relaxed? Right. From these two things, I think we get an idea of, okay, this is a good space. People are staying here. People are enjoying themselves. That's when we can actually start to look at our built environment and say, okay, what are the stores that currently surround the environment that we're in? What are the infrastructural elements that are in this place that people are either using or that are there, to be used in the future for maybe larger events? So I'll give an example of like a plaza, right? In that plaza, at least in Spain, a lot of the perimeter buildings are cafes or bars where people will go, just given the culture here, for a tapa and a coffee or a beer. right? And around that, right on the edge of the perimeter of their terraces, are trees that kind of buffer people who are just walking through the plaza and the terrace. And then on the other side of that, there are benches. So people can sit in those areas without necessarily spending any money and enjoy the ambiance of the space. And then right at the center of that plaza, there's normally what they call a kiosk, which is like a pergola of sorts. That is where they'll go and play music when they have these different festivals and parties that go on throughout the year. And when it's not being used, it is open to the public. So sometimes you'll see children running around, but it is a good third place because there are people in the space, right? And there's no, in this case, there are no cars that are blocking you or creating any kind of barrier between the bar, the terrace seating, the trees, and the benches.
Yeah. And this actually reminds me quite a bit of an exercise I did. I think probably Alex also did, but we just went to different undergrads, so I can't speak on her behalf. But one of the exercises that we did when we were kind of analyzing spaces, where they kind of just sent us out to random spots within the campus. They were like,
Mhm.
just sit down and write everything you see, like how people interact with space, who's there, look at the outside, look at the inside. And then another exercise that we did in a different course is we actually went to Toronto. I went to a university in Hamilton, and we went to Toronto, and we would just go to parks and see how each park and how different people interacted with the spaces. And you see how like the trees created a buffer from the city to kind of
Yeah.
create an I'm going to use isolation in this term, not in the urban isolation, but you kind of isolate you away from the city so you can
Mhm.
disconnect. And so that buffer, as you were mentioning, is like crucial in designing and creating spaces, in my opinion, or at least from what I've observed,
Completely.
observed. Sorry, yeah,
Observed. Yeah, no, for sure. I think like it's interesting because people can people who don't study this field and like generally have the ability to talk about this the same way, maybe not to the same extent, that's arguable, but they can talk about this the same way that we do, right? We're very quick to recognize when things are designed badly, right? Poorly, I don't know, grammar. You know that a stool has to have at least 3 legs to be able to sit on it, right? We are so quick, anybody can tell you that a two-legged stool is not gonna do them any good. But the good design is something that we lack, I think, as a skill, as on the level, like a societal level, that most people should have a basic understanding of. And so that's where my love for this education is. So like those kinds of um what do you call them? Like exercises are fantastic things that people can do. And they don't need to necessarily define the trees as a buffer, but like it's just to get yourself in the mindset of like, oh, there's a terrace there, and then there's a tree here, and then there's a bench on the other side. Like there's something happening here that's allowing everybody to be in the space. The tree adds like some nice shade, and I just appreciate that, right? As a human. So if there is building that's going to be happening in your space and all of a sudden you have this vocabulary, you can probably go into local town hall meetings and actually have a better like understanding of how to discuss this stuff with planners, and I think vice versa as well.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And exactly, I don't think it's of any significance for people to know the theory behind why things are happening
Mm,
when it comes to their day to day. But maybe it's more important for them to understand what is within their space,
mhm.
right? And so the theory behind it might be something like one theory has 400 pages on it, right? Like people write 400-page books on it, and I don't think that's necessary for people to understand the form of something and directly how it is, but to understand maybe why something is directly happening to some extent is beneficial, so you can have those conversations.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I actually have a question for you guys because in school I had to take architectural theory, and some of the stuff that we had to read. was just wild. It just like didn't sound like English. Very up like in the clouds. And it do you guys have a similar experience when talking about planning policy or like do you feel that there's this I think with architecture there's a sense of like otherness, like we are separating ourselves from the rest of the pack. And I want to try and bring it back to the ground. Um, because of these kinds of conversations. I don't know if you feel like planning and urban planning, any kind of anything in that realm is similar.
Yeah. Alex, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I say definitely some of the like I guess like key theorists,
Mhm.
they can be quite long-winded and wordy. And all they're
Mhm.
trying to say is that like this space like needs a bench to make it, livable, like quite simple things. And I think that's just the nature of like academia, honestly, and finding long ways to say certain things. But I think also sometimes it is because they're trying to just convey some of the nuances. Like we're talking a lot about, and even like for example, the one thing in my undergrad, yeah, similar to Sami, I took a public space course. So also, yeah, going around to different spaces and analyzing them. And in my public space par excellence is what I would say is always the public libraries, and so that's what I did. It was my chosen space, and I went in there, my local library, and I just sat there and I just looked. And one thing we observed was just not just how like what made the space into a place, that people want to live, but it was also how people interacted, and also
Mhm.
like also capturing some of the nuances of how different groups interacted in this space. Like for
Mhm.
example, the library I was looking at is mainly a children's library, so you have like a children's side and you have the adult side as well. But even in the adult side, the way that things are configured, for example, there's a group of elderly folks that would come every morning and they would just read their newspapers. So you have this
Mhm.
sort of like communal space that was oriented near them, and then you have another space for the kids, and there was a group of nannies that would come, and as much as it was a kind of a playground for the kids to run around and kind of throw books around, which was annoying because I used to work at the library and I had to pick them up. But it was also a great time for the nannies actually to just like sit around and chat. So like
Sure.
understanding all those different like nuances are also important to the story. But sorry, that was a bit of a
Sure.
tangent. But yeah, yeah, definitely things are long-winded. They could be said simpler, but Sammy, if you want to
Yeah,
add
for sure.
anything.
No, I love that. Oh my god, this is going back to your ideas, like, where am I getting them from? Like, this is what I love. Like, you talking about that makes me so excited because it's so there that's so cool. I mean, yeah, love
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think on my end, I can imagine the type of theory you've looked through because I know a
Mhm.
lot of architectural theory and geography and planning theory overlap. There's a lot of similar theorists. I have a lot of architects in my family and or like around me, but also have some in
Mhm.
my family. And Alex knows quite a bit of architects, and there's a lot of overlap in theory, and especially if you're interested in space and form, that's a big
Sure.
overlap. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think like your question surrounding was it like over complicated or was it like
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like in the stuff that we learn in school, like it definitely has its merit. And I learned a lot from like taking those courses.
Mhm,
It's not to negate their value. It's just that I think at the same time, it's really important to have the conversation of how do we make this more accessible so that all of us know how to talk about it better. And it's
Mhm.
not just a gated conversation for very few people to have. Um, because ultimately, like, we all live in space. So it should be designed for everybody, by
mhm,
everybody, in a sense. I mean, the ultimate hand who's going to be creating the designs will be somebody who has, like, the crazy passion for the stuff that we enjoy. The person who maybe not me, but another person who loves a good brick and just wants to talk about it,
yeah,
right? Like, I think that yeah, I think the conversation can sometimes get a bit detached and yeah, I guess originally it was, do you feel that there's is that the same kind of conversations that you feel policy and urban planning
mhm,
are having as well, or is there more of an attempt to try and create that connection?
yeah. I think between architecture, geography, and planning needs to be the most clear because it's
Hmm.
created for the people.
Hmm.
Um, And the way that I view it, and I think Alex has a similar viewpoint, the theory of planning is the application of the theory of geography. That's what I view
Mm,
it as. And so, in that sense, from my understanding of it and my current position and mindset of of knowledge, I think because it's for the people and it's the application of geography, that planning itself needs to be very clear. And I think
mm,
some principles of design needs to be very clear. And I think cities do a very good job. I think if you look at like the design plans of cities and some of the policy plans of cities, I think they're relatively easy to understand. There's
mhm.
obvious and there's often I see um, like service numbers. If you have questions, you can call up because like people that work at cities, at least in Ontario, Canada, um, they're like civil servants, and so like we have friends that work in the planning department, and someone just strolls in and they're like, "I have a question about this," and he has to stop in the middle of his whatever his report he's writing, and he has to go downstairs and answer this question for this person, mostly because he's in entry position, and so that's like that's his responsibility. That's an entry position is like go and answer everyone's questions.
Mhm.
Um, but I think when it comes to the like deep theory in geography and deep theory in architecture, I don't think it's overcomplicated. I just think it is complicated
Yeah.
and it needs to be simplified. Like there are simplified versions of it. So
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes people buy books, like 100-page or 200-page books or 150-page books on like a specific theory. But that
Mhm.
book in itself is actually the public version. Because if you look at the theory that this like 150-page book is derived from, right?
Yeah.
That book is like 650 pages of straight jargon, and you're just like, no matter how, because it's like written by some old French dude in like
Yeah, right.
1812, and you're just like, okay, and it's translated in Old English, and no one,
Yeah, right.
yeah. So, but
Mhm.
like even taking a look at that, like it unlocks a new layer, right? Like
Totally,
it
yeah.
really unlocks a new layer, and I think it's only valuable for people that are working deep into it, so they can
Mhm.
kind of like think about it in like another dimension, I guess. And so
Yeah.
Yeah.
it gives them more
Mm.
context, even though if it's gonna give them the same answer, it might give them a bit more context and understanding of why they're making a specific decision or why they're working or creating content in this in a specific way.
Mm.
So that's my perception of it, and that's my current experience. Maybe in 10 years, I'm like, no, like this is way too complicated. We need to scale it down, and it's like unnecessary. But
Yeah.
I think I doubt it because I think 4 years ago, that's how I was. I was just like, what is going on?
Yeah.
When I was a student, I was
Yeah.
like, oh,
That's
Yeah.
interesting. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Alex.
No,
Mm.
no, I agree with what you're saying, Sammy, especially because some of these things are, like I said, they're long-winded, but it's because they, like I said, trying to get those nuances. There's a lot of planning or like geography or architecture. There's like the tangible stuff, which is like the city that you see. But there's a lot of intangibles, like we're talking about
Yeah.
loneliness and
Mm.
isolation, and you're trying to capture a feeling,
Mm.
that is ultimately created by the built space. And that's really hard to do. It's hard to do, and that's why we spent 7+ years studying it, trying to understand all those different things. And then you have the professionals that come in and distill it so that it becomes actionable. Like before, we're talking about how do you turn a space into a place, and you brought up the example, Rachel, of like public project for public spaces, and they do a really good job at
Yeah.
distilling some of these theories down, where they say the power of 10. There's like 10 things that you need to see in a particular space to turn into a place, in terms of like activity, other like benches, other the different things. And
Mhm.
that just helps everybody to understand, like, oh, why do I feel miserable when I walk into this park? Oh, because there's no benches. That's good to know. Yeah, there's no trees. That's good to know. And so I think everyone has a role. Like if there's like a spectrum of like knowledge and how it comes out, everyone has a role to play, even ourselves, which is why we're part of that spectrum as well, as trying to distill
Completely.
all the things that we know and have learned in a way that's actionable for folks. Because the benefit of theory is that it teaches you sort of like how to think about certain things, and then
Mhm.
it serves as a good foundation for the action that you're going to be doing, so that not everything is always an experiment per se, although there is room for experimentation, and from that turns into theories. It's an iterative process. City building is an iterative process, as it should be. And I think that's the issue, is when things become so stagnant is when we get stuck. And our cities, or not all cities I should say, but some of them have become more stagnant than others. And that's where we're facing these problems that we're seeing, like isolation and loneliness. And I think that goes back to actually something interesting you said before about the idea of like you said, Sammy, like planning, like for the city needs to be very clear because it's for the people. But sometimes in that clarity, again, you also miss some of those intangibles that I was talking about before. And it's a balance, is what I'm trying to say. I don't have the perfect answer, but it's a balance.
Completely.
For sure a balance.
Yeah.
And I think it's a complicated balance because there's so many layers to it. So
Yeah.
there's the layers of theory and understanding per lane within the city, right? Because there's the aspect of community, right?
Yeah.
Then there's the aspect of the greater society, I guess, if you want to call it. Then there's the environmental aspect. Then there's the community economic development aspect that
Yeah.
Alex and I like look at specifically in the housing and like all these different aspects that you need to consider. And these are the different pillars that kind of keep I guess, our need to be considered to have a well-rounded community, and
Yeah.
rarely does a single city encompass all of that.
Yeah.
Or rarely encompasses all of that without the expense or the historic expense of another community or civilization. Because we can look at a lot of these European countries, for example, and people are like, "Oh my God, they're so amazing." I'm like, at the expense of like
Yeah.
the
Exactly.
rest of the world,
Everyone else.
the rest of the world,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
because
Yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. Like it's dirty, right? It's dirty work. And even when you were mentioning before, like the entry level guy needs to come in and be the one answering the questions, like that's the dirty work, right? It's talking to the people who are very affected by how their space is built currently, how you and I want to change it. And maybe they don't agree with that, or maybe they do. Who knows the historical context they're coming from, because your perspective is going to be very different from mine, and ours is going to be very different from somebody else's. So getting and capturing that community voice is very difficult, to say the very, very least. And to me, what I see, theory being synthesized. I love that you put it on a spectrum, because I really didn't think about it like that before. But I definitely I agree with that idea. It's something I'd like to think more about. But going back more so, just because I feel comfortable with the topic of like creating a language that makes it more accessible to people, having that dirty conversation. Okay, maybe I won't use dirty. Having the
It's messy.
conversation having
it's
a conversation
complicated.
that is
Yeah.
gritty, right? That is
Yeah.
that is complex, is the one that I think we have the opportunity to have a lot easier than anybody has have ever had in the past. And that is because of technology. And we can leverage that. Now, I know that like technology is also a major culprit as to like why people feel like they're lonely, but uh, I also think that we have an opportunity to use it for good here, and that's why I'm more than anything on my page. I'm just interested in seeing what other people have to say. What are your comments? What are your thoughts? What are your perspectives? Because the more that we actually hear each person's individual understandings of space, and this is something I'd like to work on developing in the future, the more that we can have these kinds of conversations, we can actually begin to pinpoint where our problems are in the community and pinpoint actions that maybe are derived by the community members that can then be taken as a general framework for designers and planners and developers to implement and hopefully actually add value that both sides want, versus it just feeling like it's coming from a system that's worked in the past, and so therefore it's being implemented in your place. So yeah, those are, I don't know if there was a question there, but that
No,
was
it's great. We're just
those are my
having back and forth conversation
yeah, yeah,
right
love it,
now.
love it.
No, and I think that's great, and I think articulating that it's almost like on a spectrum of dependent on where people are at. I think that's like
Mm.
a good way of articulating it. Um, I had a thought, and now it's like just finished. It's just finished. It's
Damn.
unfortunate because I thought it was a good thought.
Yeah.
um, this is not good. Not good. I gotta go get checked. Anyways,
It was my maybe PG-13 comments that
maybe maybe I'm
drives
like,
the
oh
whole
man.
conversation out of here. What are we talking about? Is this planning?
We're just talking about cities here, right, guys?
Yeah, right. Right.
Um, okay. Yeah. Do you have any other questions for us?
I want to know a little bit about, and I know you probably mentioned, you mentioned this in some of your other content, but if you could just mention again, like where your interests come from with planning and kind of the take that that you have on it today. What are the things that you're offering for people? I know you have services and stuff. Like, what is the
Yeah.
specific thing that makes you guys you?
Alex, you want to go first? I gotta think.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say.
my thoughts are gone.
You're like, who am I? uh, sorry, but just to clarify, you mean like overall, like is entitled planning, or like as individuals, how we came into this?
Well, yeah, as an individual, how did you get to
Yeah.
this point? And then I guess together, what are you doing to kind of achieve whatever that is?
Yeah. Okay. I'll say I'll start with the individual. For myself, in terms of how I got into planning, I kind of fell into it. I think I was always very interested in, I guess, the intersections of, let's say, like international relations, some of these different things, and how I think at the core of it, I'm always interested in people. And then I was like, I want to do something that helps people, and I was interested in how the world works. And planning is one of those places, or specifically, my background's in human geography, as well as urban studies and geographic information systems. So understanding that like the way that the world works is also plays out in the physical realm, which is like in geography and spaces. So that's what human geography kind of is. And there's a running joke in human geography because it's like half of it is trying to explain what the heck it is. Because when you say that, people are like, what? So what is that? And it is a mixture of all these different things. You take a little bit of history, a little bit of geography, a little bit of politics, and and a few other economics and anthropology. I don't know. You throw it all together and you mix it up, and you get
This
and
beautiful cocktail of
yeah. But but I'm grateful for that background in it because it really grounds a lot of the. If you think about cities as being kind of like microcosms for like larger country like issues, then it helps you to understand the systems that they fall in. And if you listen to one of our our interviews we did with Professor Maddie Sunyatiki, that's what he says. He says cities are just systems of systems, and that's what human geography allows you to understand at a larger level is how countries are systems of systems as well, and how we all kind of play a role in making them happen. But anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying that. Yeah, I fell into it thanks to my guidance counselor. It was just like, oh, based on all the things you are talking about, you probably like urban planning, and I was like, oh, okay, sure. I don't know what that is. I kind of rejected it at first. Then I just went into geography. But but the more I dove into this topic and started, studying it in my undergrad, learning about different places, it started to resonate with me even more. So like even under human geography, my specialization was under planning as well. And then I started my initial podcast, Urban Limitroph, where I started interviewing folks from across Africa, across the African diaspora, specifically because African geography's African urbanism was not something that was explored in my undergrad. And I was like, that's ridiculous. We studied every other part of the world. Why is there such a big question mark around Africa, around the Middle East? They're like, nothing exists there. And I was like, that can't be true. I've literally been there. I've seen things. So I initially started that podcast, and that really like reignited my love for planning because I was able to understand the nuances of what it is through the different groups I spoke with. And then doing my master's, that's where I met Sami, and my particular focus, or both our focuses, but mine was on the community economic development. So that was mainly because I wanted to understand. I had worked for a year in public art, and when I was working there, I was working with business improvement areas, which are basically like these associations of businesses, or that typically along like main streets, that they get band together and they pool their resources to put on events and programming, and ultimately just do like placemaking. That I thought, that I thought initially was done by the city, like itself as a, I thought that was
too. Yeah.
Yeah, you think it was a city, but it's not. So I was like, oh, it's interesting to see how all these different community groups and organizations and like kind of like third party actors influence how our city works. And then and
like
because
they
I
are
was working,
empowering themselves,
they empower themselves, they collectively, pool their resources around themselves and like do something that is good for the community. It's good for themselves, obviously, because as much as it's placemaking, it's also marketing to get people to come to their businesses, but you are sustaining the local economy, which only makes the city, stronger overall, right? So I thought that was really fantastic. And I was like, and the group that we were like interacting with at the city level was the Economic Development and Culture Division. And I was like, oh, okay, so what does this mean? This intersection of these two
Yeah.
different things, and then what is economic development? So I ended up coming back to school to explore that further, and yeah, and then that's what kind of led us to. This is I'm chunking my story, of course, but ultimately, Untitled Planning was like the kind of birth of these conversations that I was already having, interests that Sami had as well in exploring these different issues, and then our own other interests that we'll explain a little bit later, but that
Cool.
all converged together into the platform that you see today, and trying to help other people understand the role that they can play in influencing their cities, because city building is not just architects and urban planners. It is ultimately driven by communities and people. But if
Yeah.
people don't know, the systems at play, then it's harder to get involved. So that's what we're trying to
Yeah.
demystify
Well,
that process.
right, and it's not like you were mentioning the African diaspora, and I love that you bring that up because I learned only about like white architect, white male architects. Those were the
Mhm.
people that had influence at the time. Great, cool, but you don't hear a lot of different voices. So being online as well, I think we have a huge platform to be able to leverage different voices, and we need to encourage that more. So that's amazing that you're doing that. That's really cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I always come up with a joke in my head for some reason. It cracks me up because it's just. But
Sure.
I'm gonna kind of give
No.
a. I'm gonna give I think like a unorthodox answer, because
Yeah.
I find every time someone asks me like, how did Untitled Planning happen, or how
Mm,
did my interest of urban planning come about or geography come about, I always come with something, right? Like I always have an answer, and usually it has to do with like, me moving a lot as a kid, country to country. My dad's a professor in architecture and urbanism, so that influence was definitely there. But there's so many layers that like.
Mhm.
I don't even know if any of them actually impacted me, or if it was just the position that I was in that time. Because I think
mm,
if I was better at the sciences, I probably would have been in the sciences, right?
mm.
If I was better in engineering, I probably would have been in engineering, just based off of my general interests of like what seems a bit more sparkly to me. I wouldn't say looking at geography and I was like, oh my god, actually, I don't know how it works in the States or in Europe or something, but in high school, when you go into grade 9 in high school in Ontario at least, I think you choose between academic and college level courses, or like
Mhm.
university or college
Yeah.
level courses. The only course I didn't take as an academic level course was geography. I took that as like there's like 3 layers, and I took it at the base level. I'm like, I'm not going to geography. I'm like, ignore that. That was the only course I took in grade 9 that was a college level course, or maybe even one below it, whatever the one like
Yeah.
applied. I think
Yeah,
maybe
I think
applied
that's
is
the
the
one.
lowest
Yeah,
form, and I
yeah.
was like, I
Yeah.
took applied. I'm like, I don't care about rocks, and I don't care about cities. I'm like, I'm like,
What are you talking about?
I'm like, oh man, all the layers of the earth. I'm good.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think I took another geography course in high school until like grade 12. So like my final year, and that was on like world issues or world politics. That
Mm,
was more politically focused, and so there was like I think slight discussions coming up about like globalization and gentrification and stuff like that. But it was
Mm.
more on the macro level, not on the micro level.
I took that class too. World issues.
Yeah,
Game
the
changer.
Ontario system, they just make everyone take the yeah.
Changes you.
It does change you, and
Yeah.
I think at that point it wasn't as much. I may be wrong. I think like maybe my high school teacher might be watching this and he's like, this guy, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But I thought I liked that class, but it was a bit too simple minded for me, if that makes sense. At that time, I think people had specific. Sometimes people would ask questions, and I'd be like, "Whoa, like what are you talking about?" And I remember on my report card, my high school teacher was like, "You need to be more open minded to other people's like inquiries." And I was just like, "No," I was like, "No, I don't think I should be actually." um, but I was like 17. I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, right. That's normal
Yeah, yeah.
at that age.
Um, and then I think throughout like my undergrad, I think like that as I did my undergrad in geography. I went to geography because it was between. It wasn't even geography. It was even my first choice. I was like, If you looked at my university application system, it was like business, environmental, media, like business media, which was like a new thing at one of these programs. It was just basically all a mixture of business and sustainability, which was like this new thing at like Waterloo University. Rejected. Boom, boom, boom. just rejected after rejection. So,
1, 2.
1, 2, 3. And then I got into McMaster for geography. It was like social science geography, and I think at that time they were like the best ranked for social science for research or something, like number 1 in 2017. And so I was like, okay, it's either that or some other university. And I was like, I'm gonna go to McMaster. It's a very good school. It's like a well ranked school overall, but it's a very good school in the way they teach and stuff. And I think my interests then probably got layered from my past. Like I was just thinking about like the different courses, and I think I was able to relate to topics more just because of my lived experience and like the discussions I've had with my dad. My brother's was in architecture school, so the discussions I had with my brother. And so I think it roots from trying to solve specific issues I had a problem with. And the biggest one came to me was homelessness. People were like, I remember in high school and people were like, what's your biggest fear? And I'm like, I don't know, be homeless. And then they're like, well, what? And I'm just like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Other people were like, I thought I would just never have like a car. And I'm like, no, man, I'm like dead afraid of being homeless.
Yeah.
And so I think like homelessness as a issue was always like in the back of my mind. I'm like, how do we address this? How do we address this problem?
Yeah.
So that's maybe third year, fourth year university. I started exploring that a bit more. Globalization was a big thing, but honestly, like my lens in geography for the first like half, or even honestly for all 4 years, had to do with sustainability. Like, how can we be more green and sustainable?
Yeah.
And but with the layer of like, how do we make the community better? And I just realized, like, in my opinion, and I know I'm gonna get big hate for this, like we're too small for me to say this, but in my opinion, good planning, good community development, good housing, right? If it's actually good, sustainability will be the byproduct. But you can create sustainable things and it won't be affordable, feasible, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't think it goes both ways. And so,
Yeah.
I mean environmentally sustainable specifically. So just because it's environmentally sustainable, it doesn't mean you're gonna have a good community, doesn't mean you're gonna have good housing.
Yeah.
But mandatory aspect of good housing and mandatory aspect of a good community needs to be sustainability. And that's my opinion, right? Like, it's me, all right? I'm not saying it's for you guys. I'm saying it's for me. Just for anyone who's like, you can't say that as a general. It's not a general statement. It's all me.
Yeah. No. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I personally feel like I have a stronger focus right now on the social sustainability side because from my personal experiences and my perceptions, I see that that's a very weak element in our societies today, and we're very focused on, and rightfully so, like ecological sustainability and even to some extent economic sustainability. But I think that we need to focus a little bit more on how do we infuse social strength again into our society and how do we make that long term.
Yeah.
So I mean, I completely agree with you. At the end of the day, it will need to be some sort of a balance of the three, and it'll probably look different in every place, but that's like the goal, right?
Yeah.
Which
Sorry,
we're
just
working for. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, just to jump in, I would say I agree with Sami in what he's saying, and it reminds me, my undergrad, similarly, I was really like deep into like environmental geography. Like my specialization was human geography because I was like, that's what I just had all the courses for it. So I was like, I'm not gonna, jump ship halfway through my degree, but I took a lot of environmental like courses as well. And talking about what you said, what you just spoke to, Rachel, is that like, the fundamentals of, I would say like when I went back to school, so I talked about my interest personally being like community economic like development, but what I had actually applied for was under the term resilience. I'm like, I want to be like a person that focuses on resilience in cities.
Yeah.
And the core pillars of resilience are economic like sustainability. You have social, and then you have environmental as well. So like even sustainability, similar principles, like all three have to play in order for them to work. So like a good housing system, and going back to what Sami said, like if you focus too much on one versus the other things fall apart. Like you could have the greenest house that you've ever built, that you've ever did see, and but it could be the most expensive house. So like if only the rich can afford to be ecologically ecologically friendly in the way and in the way they're living, what about the rest of us when the 99% of the world can't afford to do so? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So like it's all really important to be considered in order to create cities that are and communities that are like actually sustainable, like actually true long-term sustainable.
Yeah.
But
No,
anyway,
great.
sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sammy. Your story.
And just to comment on what Alex was saying, so there isn't like a misunderstanding, because I know some people will go like, well, if it's sustainable, then it's going to be lower costing. Listen, if the system the house functions in isn't sustainable, isn't meant for affordability, that house isn't going to be affordable. And so it goes back to the system that
Mm,
this
good
thing
point.
functions in. And that's a thing that I've like focused on a lot is, yeah, I'll just leave it there. I think that's for another rant and
Yeah,
tangent.
for sure.
Um,
I'd like to just add one additional thing
yeah.
because along with thinking about the built environment, I'm always finding ways to take the stuff in my life and compare it to our built spaces. So I have two thoughts. One is about a banana and the other is about yoga. I'll start with the yoga. Yoga is something I practice on a daily basis. It helps to just keep me calm and it gets me established for the day. And one of the things my teacher always says is that balance is hard to achieve and that there will be some days that even though you feel like everything you've done everything right to prepare yourself, you will still fall down. So even, and balance is normally happening when you're on one foot. So balance in any way, if you extrapolate that to a larger scale, is a very difficult thing to achieve, and oftentimes is maybe only achieved for a couple of minutes before something falls, but that we need to just give ourselves the grace to get back up and try again. And that's essentially this idea of being a positive and yet practical um, designer, right? Now, the second story I have about a banana is that in my sustainability courses that I took in school, one of the first things that I learned about was how the banana was first sold to the United States. There is a commercial with a woman, one woman. It's a banana that is supposed to look like a woman, and her skin is has no blemishes on it, so it's yeah. Her skin has no blemishes on it. It's just the regular yellow peel, right? And the banana then in the United States was considered only good to eat if the peel was clean. There's no browning on it. So the way that we discuss our built environment, the things that we speak around like sustainability we have to be very careful about it because in a way we are doing marketing as well. And you talking about how we need to find this balance, and I feel like a part of that, it all comes back down to the communication aspect of what we're speaking on. And to the point of the professor, what he was trying to make was essentially like, it was this the sustainability is something that that we can achieve, but we need to understand like how our language and even the symbolism that we're using can be extrapolated in ways that we may not have thought of. And so today, even still, people probably think that the banana, even though they don't see that commercial, bananas are only good if they are only eaten with with the skin clean. And that is not the best example of what is good for us or why we only eat a certain type of banana as well, right? Like it's this idea of like homogeneity. And I think sustainability is something that's going to ultimately look very different on different levels. And yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have any more to add to that. That's my banana story.
Well, I guess you can say big banana didn't think about banana bread. Uh, it's only good banana bread if it's dotted, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But
exactly. It's true.
maybe,
It's true.
yeah. But maybe to wrap up my what do you call it? My journey
Origin
of
story.
becoming
Yeah.
my origin story.
Yeah, yeah.
um, where was I? Oh yes. And so I was like really afraid of like the homelessness thing and then all of that stuff. And so COVID hit, and I was just like, I knew I was going to apply to planning. Actually, I had a middle of my undergrad, I had a breakdown because I was like failing GIS, and my GIS instructor at the time was like, you can only be a planner if you know GIS. And I did the first GIS course, good, got like an 80 something. Second GIS course, every assignment I did was a 48%. I was like, no. I was like, how does this happen? I should probably not out myself like that, but like that's just the reality of it. I
It's a
don't claim
learning
to be.
process. We've
Yeah, man.
established it's all about learning. It's continuous
Yeah,
learning. So
for sure, for sure. And I don't like honestly like I've gone better at GIS, but it was like at the time I was just like it was like a struggle, and
sure.
I low key
It's
blame the
happening.
TA, but like it's fine. The TA could have taught that course a bit better, or could have been a bit useful, more useful. But anyway, so I was like, oh, like I can't be a planner. Like I remember literally breaking down because like you're spending all this money, you're like hoping to get a
Yeah.
profession out of it. And I was like, my fear was like, I don't want to be just like this theorist that can't get a job, you know. But I also learned theorists do get a job because they just do research on behalf of companies. But like, oh no, I think you guys would see that.
We can censor
That's
it.
fun. So one of many closets, all right, guys. Where was I going with this? Anyways, yeah. So I was having a mental breakdown. I was like, oh no, not me being bad at JS. I gotta be like a academic forever or something. And then I was like, that guy lied to me. I don't know why he lied to me. I think he was funded by big GIS, so I think he was just like trying to push it on us. And so, anyways, I eventually do my 4th year independent study on housing and homelessness, and I did it on a local scale. So I looked at Toronto. I looked at it on a semi-global, not fully global scale, but like let's say national, provincial, and a local scale in the Canadian context. But I also did consider like international cases on like housing and homelessness. And I was just like, okay, well, this is a big problem. A big problem. Like it was like it was like a problem I was already aware of, but it was just I think the function because I'm like, is there no solutions? And like me being like 20, like, is there no solutions? Like, oh, there are solutions. I was like, I don't know. And then I'm just like, oh, this must be the answer for everything, this solution specifically. And then like whatever, like every time I discover something, and then like the more I think the biggest turning point maybe in my 3rd or 4th year, and this is like a turning point that everyone discovers sometimes in their life. And I think often, maybe I'm telling this to myself, but I think more often than not, people discover this a bit too late in their life. And this is something that I think really good academics are aware of. And not only academics, but people of knowledge in any subject. And it's that the more you know, the more you know you don't know. Right? It's like the more you know, the more you don't know, right? And so because you're aware of what's out there. And that's actually that's something I've learned recently. That's a sign of a good academic, and that's a sign of a good someone that's spewing stuff. Is that not spewing stuff? I think that's negative, but someone that's educating the public. If they sound uncertain, that's usually a good sign, because uncertainty is usually because they're considering so many different variables. So if you listen to a prof or a someone with a lot of experience and they're like, it might be this, it depends, it's this. It's usually because there's so much to consider, and they're not trying to sell a false dream. Usually, if
Yeah.
people are like telling you something matter of fact, like this is what it is, 9 times out of 10, or 8 times, I don't know, like 10 times out of 10, let's say, they're trying to sell you something. Hey,
Yeah.
this is my consulting service. Hey, this is like, oh, my media campaign course. Take it, please. I know everything. They're trying to sell you something. So beware. Anyways, going back, I applied, got into U of T. Shout out to U of T. Love you guys. And then did my urban planning, focused specifically on community economic development and housing. That was like they like placed it all in one. It's a long title, but that was like my focus. Those were the courses I took. I primarily focused taking workshop courses so I can get as much client experience. And so workshop courses are, in another term, are just consulting courses. And so we worked with a lot of clients. We consulted with a lot of clients. We created a lot of reports, designs, whatever, worked in multidisciplinary teams. And then, and I think I told myself of like, if I'm going to spend any time of work of my life, right, slaving away, it's going to be something that's going to be beneficial, right?
Yeah.
Something that's going to have action. And because I could just be like a guy that plans out routes for buses. Like I have a friend that actually does that. He works at a school board. He plans out busing routes. He's a planner or GIS technician. Like, and that's really needed. But I know like that doesn't have longevity for my personal needs, because my personal needs in my attention span, I need to be, I think, like challenged and always view for growth. I don't think that's necessary for everyone, but for me personally, I want to just be moving forward And sometimes I wish I could just be like a GIS tech and just sit down and make maps and explore and do exercises and maybe create like some AI GIS mapping things and just like,
Sure.
because like that also has an appeal to me. I just know I can't, like, I don't have the attention span for it. Anyways, all of that to say, I don't really know how and why the reason I got into planning. I just know the reason I'm doing it is so I can create impactful discussions and change. And that's why we have Untitled Planning. Long story short.
I love that. No, that's great. Yeah, I think you totally have like touching on like what other people do in this space to, like there's a huge spectrum of us who want to be working at that lower level designing.
I wouldn't say it's lower level though. I just think
Sure.
it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Good point. Not lower level. But I'm just thinking more micro level. In
Micro,
terms of
that's
like,
exactly for sure.
yeah, not lower at all. Very needed work. If that's something you're passionate about, then you should go for it. And that's not necessarily something I'm not interested in. Having studied mostly architecture, but talking predominantly about urbanism, someone asked me the other day, why don't you discuss architecture more, and why are you kind of more focused on the urban aspect of the design field? And I feel at this point that it's because most of the conversations that I have had around architecture up to this point in my life have been about more of the theoretical stuff or more of the like structural aspect of how a building is built, and et cetera, versus actually thinking about it as a service as well. Being in service or of service to the people that will be using it. Those conversations were very lightly touched on in my degree, but I feel like are more common in the planning field. So at least from my experience and my perspective. So that's why I have more of an interest in talking about urbanism, but I do want to find ways to incorporate better the idea of architecture as a service, to its space, to its people and its community in the future. So those are kind of things that I'm thinking about as well. Just to your point on like wanting to continually progress and improve, my choice to do, social media and kind of putting my brand online, doing it this way, I felt like there was no other way for me to get some of the points that I wanted to get across at the level I hope to get them across at some point, or at least even, the people that I'm able to connect with through this. I don't think it would have been possible if it were not for trying to put this stuff that I know and I'm learning online.
Yeah, for sure. And I think my last comment in regards to what you're saying about like the micro, I think that's exactly what it is. Because the micro, then that's exactly why I went to planning, because planning is a bit more macro. But even within planning, there's like different levels of how macro can be, or like how micro to macro scale exists. Because like I like looking at, I have friends that like focus on very specific things, and honestly, like it's so important and so needed, because otherwise, like it's a building brick to how macro you can go, right? But it's a two-way street. That's why I was like, that's why I don't want to say corrected, but like that's why I said like it's
you
not
did.
lower level.
I was definitely used a poor choice of words there for sure. No,
yeah. But I think like even the terminology lower, if you're looking at it through like a pyramid, it is like the necessity. Like you are in that base level, and like I don't think necessarily what we do can exist without that stuff, because we're like, if like on the side with Alex and I are also doing research consulting and whatnot, I guess we haven't announced that yet, but like that's what we do on the side with Untitled Planning, alongside with the media stuff. But like if those people didn't exist, who do we have to help, right? Like who do we have to be there for? We would like that's where we would be. But anyways, I think that's like, I guess we can. Anything else?
360.
I mean, the only thing I'll add is that there's one quote that I always think of with doing this kind of work, just in general or anything, because sometimes, all these topics can be quite overwhelming. Like you talk about homelessness, and you're just like, oh
Yeah.
snap, what can I do?
Right,
You
right,
know,
right.
or you think, especially like the one that comes to mind always is climate change. You know, I was on another podcast and they asked me an interesting question. They're like, oh, what can we do for climate change as individuals? And I was like, well, it's not an individual. It wasn't produced by like one particular person. So you
Yeah.
thinking as one person that you're gonna save the entire world is you know, that's a tough sell, and that's
Very
what it leads, I
Dramatic.
think, it's dramatic, and that's what it
You're
leads
being
to a lot of
dramatic. Yeah.
like, yeah, like I think there's like climate anxiety and other kinds of things where people just feel helpless, you know. And I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, but my thought that I always think about these things is that like the quote that I think of is that is do what you can with what you have where you are.
Mhm.
And for
Mhm.
some people it is focusing on the micro, and you need those micro people to like look at, inspect things and see
Mhm.
where there are the cracks. And you need people at the macro level, but I think the
Yeah.
most important part is that you need them all to work together. And that's
Yes.
where this is where like a role like a urban planner comes in, because I like to think of us as sort of like if there's like a symphony, like a symphony orchestra, you have like, you know, the winds, you have the like the brass and all those different kind of sounds,
Yeah.
and then you have sort of like the conductor, the maestro, kind of pulling everything together, and you need someone to see everything and make sure that everyone's hitting the right harmonies
You
and
have the
beats.
sound engineers. Yeah, like
Yeah,
there's a lot going
Without
on.
like, yeah, to create harmony, I think we need codependence. And in a society, a Western society that has thrived off of the idea that independence is everything for as long as it has, we need to find the middle again between what does it mean to be dependent on one another, and our strengths versus being completely alone, in what we stand for, because we are inherently a social species, and in order for us to continue to thrive as a species, again back to like the caring about the well-being of humanity, we need to be okay with relying on one another again, and recognizing that we're all going to come at things from different angles, but that at the core of it all, through good communication and connection, I think that that sets the foundation for anything to be, you know, a good project, whether we're working at like the micro level, or if we're looking at it from the pyramid of like the lower level of things is predominantly people on the ground working on the details. Like the communication, in my opinion, is the foundation and the ground level work for creating people who are intelligent enough, I shouldn't say intelligent enough, but well versed enough to start discussing these issues, or feel empowered enough to start discussing these issues to people who may have more interest in this and can actually start to incite that change. Like we all need each other. I think if
Mhm.
we begin to start to care about one another again and respect each other, overall, that we can really start to see some forward change in whatever a lot of these larger issues are.
Yeah, that's great. So last thing, Rachel,
Mhm.
where can viewers find your content, and what can they do to support your channel or become more involved in the community that you're trying to build and that you have built so far?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm on YouTube, so you can find me on YouTube under Studio Leonardo, and on Instagram, LinkedIn, Threads, TikTok is just my name, Rachel Leonardo, Rachel. And to support my channel, I really just want you to interact, communicate with me, send me a DM, interact in the comments with each other. Overall, I think that's really what I'm looking for. Um, and yeah, I don't know, I think I hopefully hit all your points there. But I really appreciate you guys having the conversation with me today. I love talking about this stuff. And if you are interested in talking about this stuff as well, again, hit me up. This is something that's continuous. It's ever growing. From my end, all I ever want to do is talk about it and try to do what I can to take action. So, if you're a listener, let me know, and I'd love to connect.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you to everybody who's been listening. So you can stay connected with us on all social platforms at Untitled Planning, and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on new content, collaborations, and opportunities to get involved in building a better urban future. We've actually collaborated with Rachel on a video that will be on her channel, so make sure to head on to Studio Leonardo to check it out. And we have more joint videos on that are coming soon to our channel, so make sure to subscribe for updates. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you again having me on. Thanks, everyone.